And the second question is one that was tagged for David. And the question was, how have you moved from project-based change strategies to a more systemic and organisational sort of approach? I guess it's tying in with what Stephen Joyce was referring to yesterday when we were talking about the idea of business as usual.
Over time, we've had a range of things happen at CPIT and across different institutions. Is that okay, Pushpa? Is that right? Okay. We had Learning for Living, which provided the initial spark. It was external consultants working and supporting institutions, starting those deliberate acts of teaching. We had Words That Up, which was the internal process, the internal professional development, that what we call that funded capability project for us, and it's still in process. And now we're trying to work on the whole embedding itself of the actual literacy and numeracy process to getting to business as usual. But before we carry on, I'm just going to say, fundamentally, this whole thing's been transformative. It's actually transformed learners, it's transformed educators. It's made people change their way of delivery. And one of the things has been an ownership of learning and an ownership of teaching by teachers and learners. And fundamentally, I've noticed a change in terms of process and pedagogy. So in other words, this acknowledgement that what we've got to give learners is not just content, but actually those skills for problem solving. And that's been quite implicit, I think, in a lot of the work. And that within 2 years has been quite a significant change. So one of the things, how did we actually get this business as usual? Well, how are we trying to do it, I suppose? The project had institutionalization as its outcome, and we've got many fun people in institutions as a result. No, I was joking, but the project had institutionalization as its outcome. When we wrote it up, we were supposed to have it so that we'd be getting it sort of as a self-fulfilling kind of prophecy, that we'd actually get it going. I think we've learned some of that might be a bit more challenging. One of the things we did was to make sure that it was part of our learning design process. It's not just an add-on, it's part of designing a learning program, the profile that you have, the graduate profile, and the assessment. It's not just an add-on, so you've got to sort of see it in that context. We try to integrate it into our current systems and change them also. They made us question some of the systems. So PD, professional development, is not just, well, we normally try and squash bits and learn German perhaps in the weekends or something, but no. PD becomes far more a core aspect of what it is to be a tutor and a manager and an administrator at an institution. It has to take center stage, and if you say you haven't got space for it, you're making a mistake. What we did was also integrate it into our program reports so that there was no space to hide. So but what we call our APERs, our annual program evaluation reports. So in that, if you taught on a program that had embedded literacy, you had to actually work and report on what you'd done on embedded literacy, how your capability had improved. And you do that as a matter of course now. So if you're teaching on a level 1 to 3 program, you're going to include within that a reflection in your evaluative conversation about your level 1 to 3 activity. Appraisal, well, I don't know if it's putting it a bit strong, but we have tried to integrate this as something which we actually fit into how people work within the institution. We acknowledge it too, and we've introduced awards for integrated literacy and numeracy as well. So Excellence in Teaching awards have moved along. And developing communities of practice has been quite significant too. And that's one of the most amazing things that you see with this, is people carrying on conversations in corridors about teaching and learning. And that's a big transformation. It's something that creates its own life. One of the things about change management, and I won't concentrate on that, is you've got to actually change management as well. You know, you've got to change management. We have to learn what it is to embed literacy and numeracy. We've got to learn what it is to engage learners. We've got to learn how to communicate these questions around completion and retention and why that's important. We've got to communicate the changing society and what we're preparing the workforce for. It's not adding layers. That's the other thing. One of the things that people often feel is you're being strangled by all of this stuff. Now I've got to embed literacy and numeracy, and I've got to have unit stats. The big thing to try and do is to say, no, it's not quite like that. It's more like that waves of change. It's taking that change and permeating it across the institution. And there are a whole lot of them. And they do come. And that's part of being at the Polytechnic, is learning and being part of those waves of change. The other thing to significantly do, which is a bit of a challenge in terms of integration, is de-siloization. It's a dreadful word, but at Polytechs and as separate institutions, we're hugely used to working in separate bits. It gives us comfort. It's hugely wasteful, and it actually creates huge problems. Managers don't talk to administrators, don't talk to academic staff. Faculties don't talk to each other. What we need and what we've tried to develop is communities of practice around those, which are saying we can have conversations. Resource allocation, well, that's going to be a wee bit of a challenge, but do remember, it's not going to get any better. We're getting less money, and it's costing us more to deliver. There's no way of getting around that. We've got to think smartly around that. We had an earthquake. You might have heard we had a bit of an earthquake. And one of the things that did, it made us question fundamentally what we were doing. Because once you've got a class, all you've got is a learner, well, hopefully a few learners, a teacher in a classroom, which happens to be a church hall. You start questioning what it is. It's the outcomes that you focus on, and how do you get those outcomes? And I think actually challenging some assumptions, challenging what it is. Why do we measure work in terms of contact hours? All of these kinds of things. Challenging those assumptions becomes quite important. Measuring things is a bit of a challenge, but I won't talk about a whole lot of things. And of course, we have to get used to this whole range of things, of new things coming along, and how we've got to fit in not only this idea of literacy and numeracy, but fluencies and challenges for 21st century skills that our learners have to have. So, one of the things that I went to this thing in Brisbane. It was really interesting because it's a surreal exhibition at the Brisbane Modern Arts Museum. And I think one of the key things is that we have to think outside the square in all of this. We have to challenge assumptions in order to actually make sure we can institutionalize things. We've got to change the institution to accommodate these things. I'm not quite sure what that fits in, but it's just kind of a surreal depiction of something. But we've got to change. We've got to put those shoes on and do the hard walk. Thanks.
Thank you so much for that, David.